Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the panel, When All Jobs Are Tech Jobs. We can hope to learn what that title means by the end of the session, I hope. I'm Kevin Delaney. I'm the editor-in-chief. I'm CEO of a media and research company called Charter, and we're a future of work focused on issues around inclusion, flexible working, AI and work, some of which relate to our discussion today. So our discussion today is about the skills needed by businesses now and in the future, and how to make sure all American workers have access to them and the economic opportunity that they bring. The core questions before us are, how do we build a skilled workforce that meets the needs of employers, and how do we help people reach their economic potential? These are important questions. And in some ways, this is all of us. The World Economic Forum estimates that by 2025, 50% of all employees will need reskilling. I'm happy today to have three super speakers to talk about their experiences, what research says about this, best practices, and so that we can take away some views about how to actually tackle this problem. I'm going to start with Zoe Baird. She's right next to me. Zoe is senior counselor to U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo, and it's for technology and economic growth. Zoe focuses on advancing U.S. competitiveness in key technologies and ensuring the economic benefits are shared by innovative businesses as well as a trained workforce. Previously, she was CEO and president of the Markle Foundation, which works on some of the issues we'll talk about today, expanding access to quality jobs for all Americans. Welcome, Zoe. Thank you. Lisa at the end. Lisa Gevelber is the founder of Grow with Google, the company's economic opportunity initiative, helping millions of people around the world get digital skills. She also created the Google Career Certificates, which have helped hundreds of thousands of people without college degrees get trained and certified for tech careers. She has several jobs that I'm not mentioning that are part of her sprawling portfolio that you can ask her about afterwards. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you.
And finally, there's Andy Van Clunen. He's the founder and CEO of National Skills Coalition, which aims to make inclusive quality skills training available to every worker in the US. NSC does this by advocating for policy reforms in Washington, D.C., and through affiliates in over 20 states. Welcome, Andy.
Thanks, Kevin.
So we're going to have a conversation up here for about half an hour, and then we're going to open it up to you for any questions or reactions or brilliant ideas that you might have for fixing the skills gap. So Zoe, I'm going to start with you. How should we be thinking about this skills gap specifically for the 60% of Americans who don't have four-year college degrees?
Thanks. Let me start by talking about a broader issue, which is America's competitiveness. One of the priorities that I'm sure you've seen in multiple pieces of legislation that have been passed the last couple of years have been to try to rebuild our technology capabilities and advanced manufacturing capabilities that America has lost leadership on, and that includes the manufacture of chips, which drive all technology, with the billions of dollars of investment in the CHIPS and Science Act. It includes the broadband deployment around the country, and you probably saw that the president announced yesterday $40 billion in grants to deploy broadband in areas of the country that don't have access to high-speed internet. It includes a lot of the construction that's being done. Construction is not just bridges and roads, but it's using robots to knock down brick walls. Technology is really impacting a whole range of areas where you might not typically think about that. And with these investments and with the focus that we now have on the need for the public sector to work with the private sector and with communities to really rebuild our competitiveness globally and not take for granted that just because it's cheaper to do something outside of the US that that's inevitably where it will be done. You're now seeing that these pieces of legislation have workforce funding in them because it's recognized that in order to pursue these fields, we need to train the workers to do this. Almost every sector that matters for our competitiveness, even including financial services or healthcare, all are changing in the skills that are required for those jobs. And for us to continue to lead, to continue to innovate, we really need to develop the workforce that's capable of pursuing those skills. And if you think about it, 10 years ago, you probably didn't even know that there were data scientists or semiconductor fab technicians or cybersecurity experts or robotics operators. You know, those weren't jobs that were front of mind. But now those are the high growth jobs, and as was referenced, those jobs don't require a 4-year college degree. So we'll hear from my colleagues on the panel some of the things that people are doing to include in the future workers people who don't have a 4-year college degree. But I just conclude by saying that our future really will turn on whether or not we can develop a system of training workers for the rapid changes that are happening in the labor market, and bringing people into these new jobs now, but also creating a system of constant learning and training and growth.
So I'd love maybe in a few minutes we can follow up on the question of the workforce support, the training support that's as part of these initiatives. Where does that actually go? And we'll come back to that. But is the magnitude and the approach to building workforce training support into these big initiatives like CHIPS and science, is that new, or is that a unique approach to this moment given the rapid evolution of skills needed?
Yeah, Congress has been very reluctant to fund workforce training in the past. There's been some funding for it, but there hasn't been a strong enough sense of the relationship between the training funded and the jobs. And what's really different now is that companies of all sizes are saying that our number one challenge is getting the workforce we need. In Europe, it's the number 2 challenge after the energy crisis, but it's broadly recognized that we have a distinctive challenge, and that's been really a driver in Congress appreciating. Obviously, the Biden administration has been a big advocate for worker training and for having a focus on the workers, not just the technology and the businesses. But Congress has come to recognize that in part also because business recognizes the need.
Andy, I want to pull you in and talk about the jobs that exist today and the skills that are needed, and what the matchup is with our current workforce and the state of American worker skills.
Absolutely, thanks, Kevin. And just to follow up on Zoe's point, I mean, the scale of investment that is needed in this country today in order to be able to prepare everybody, both for new jobs that are being created, to stay in the jobs that they currently are in, where skills are changing rapidly, the scale of investment that we need relative to what we've been able to get across the finish line, at least at the federal level, like that is where there is a huge gap. And I think that the Biden administration has done a great job of at least trying to say, if we're going to rebuild our infrastructure, we should have a workforce training strategy connected to it. Unfortunately, Congress delinked those two things, and so all of the workforce training that was in the original infrastructure proposal eventually was put into the Build Back Better Act, which was the bill that did not get across the finish line. So I think that everybody recognizes that it's not just going to be about rebuilding the country, but investing in the people of this country. And this is something that is going to be impacting, as you said, all of us. We recently did some analysis post-pandemic with what was going on just with the infusion of technology and required digital skills in a set of jobs. And we all were part of those future work conversations back in 2017, 2018, and were robots coming to take everybody's jobs. And we kind of came to realize that while there were going to be jobs that were going to be eliminated, there were being some new jobs created, but that the majority of jobs, 50 to 60%, the OECD number is kind of right in that ballpark, we're going to be changing the nature of how technology was going to be in particular jobs, and we were going to have an expected needed of investment in worker skills in order to be able to kind of keep them ahead of that technological curve. So we wanted to see, because so much of that future of work change that we thought was like, a decade or two in the future, pandemic accelerated all of that. And so we want to do an analysis like, what is the digital skill requirement across the labor market today relative to where we were a few years ago? So we worked with the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank, did a series of analyses on job posting data nationwide and within states, and then we did some other kind of anecdotal interviews with folks in different industries. And the study found that 92% of job postings in the country today have some either explicit or implicit digital skill requirement. So half of them put it right out there, you need to know how to use this software, this technology, things like that, or it describes a task that the only way you could do it today is if you had some way of using a laptop, a set of mobile apps, things like that. And so that is a huge problem. That is labor market wide, right? And yet about a third of US workers currently lack the digital skills to even take a course to get some of those digital skills, let alone to be able to stay ahead of what's happening in their industries. It predominantly is in a lot of service sector industries, so retail and hospitality, entry-level healthcare, but you also see it in manufacturing too. You see it in places like construction. I mean, we've talked to construction managers that say that their workers on site are using 3 to 5 mobile apps a day, right? They're subcontractors that are trying to communicate with the contractor who's got a digital blueprint. They have to pull it up on an iPad at a work site that may or may not actually have good Wi-Fi. These are all English language apps, and we have in different parts of our country where English is not the first language for many of our construction workers. So that's construction today, right? Manufacturing now, we have folks that are not just computer numerically controlled CNC machinists, but they have to know AutoCAD, they have to know data analysis, they have to know something about SQL programming. Even in healthcare, like the person who used to check you in to your office visit now is trying to set up a telehealth visit for you, right? With somebody who may themselves, particularly if they're older, not know how to kind of work Zoom or things like that, right? And that is a set of home care workers that are now taking patient vitals and reporting them back to a nurse who's off-site. These are all things, these are jobs where most of these are workers who do not have a college degree. They're the workers that we have tended not to invest in as a country, both from the public perspective, but also the private sector. Like, private sector is very good at investing in its workforce that already has a BA. It is not very good at investing in folks who have less than that. Mm-hmm. And so this is going to be able to address 92% of the jobs that we have in this country is going to require a wholesale change in how it is that we prioritize this at the public policy level, but also industry is going to have to think differently about how it is that it's making its investments at all levels of its workforce, so we're going to keep everybody ahead.
So let's bring in industry. Lisa.
All right.
On that note, when Grow with Google, what problem were you targeting with it, and how does it line up with Zoe's point about competitiveness, Andy's points about the skills gap?
I think it actually lines up really nicely. So we created Grow with Google as Google's big economic opportunity initiative. And based on a fundamental belief that the opportunities that are created by technology have to be available to everyone. And we honed in on one very specific problem that's already been mentioned here, which is about 80% of jobs in our country that pay well, so more than at least $35,000 a year, say they require a college degree, but only a third of Americans have one. And I think the truth is everyone knows that college degree is a terrible proxy for knowing that someone is capable of this work. Make no mistake, having a college degree is life-changing. It just cannot be the only way to change your life. So that's the problem that we set out to solve with the Google Career Certificate Program. So what we do is we're training people and certifying them in a variety of really in-demand career fields. And then we've tried working with the whole ecosystem, because the problem that I'm talking about, where 2/3 of Americans and similar percentages around the world are locked out of good jobs, is just too big for any one of us to solve alone. And so we're working with education institutions and with employers who, as Andy said, are desperate to find people with these skills. And we're building robust workforces, or robust workers with these skill sets. So we're training people to become cybersecurity analysts and data analysts, IT support professionals, project managers, digital marketers, all really in-demand fields. In our country, there's actually millions of open jobs just in these fields today. And I'm really proud of the progress that we're making. We just last week announced that we've graduated 500,000 people. Thank you. 500,000 people in just the past 2 years. Many of those people going from really low wage work into these career fields that are high paying and have tons of growth potential.
And what's just to Andy's point about, there's some portion of workers who don't have the basic digital skills to be able to take classes. Are you finding you're able to reach those folks as well and give them access to these professions?
Yeah, so the Google Career Certificate program, the one I was just speaking about, is by nature online and on demand. And it has to be, because most working Americans don't control their work schedules. About 25% of Americans don't even know their work schedule for the next week. So they can't always commit to sit in a classroom. They need to be able to do this work when they have time. And so all of our career certificate work is all online on demand. You do it at your own pace. You can finish any of our certificates in 3 to 6 months of part-time study. We have additional programs besides the Google Career Certificates that have much more foundational digital skills. They'll teach you how to, believe it or not, how to write and use email programs, how to use a spreadsheet. You know, none of us is born knowing how to use a spreadsheet, and most of us didn't learn in school. But for a lot of jobs, as Andy is saying, just knowing how to use a spreadsheet is a fundamental skill. So we have a separate set of programs as part of our Grow with Google portfolio where you can learn all of those things as well.
You mentioned a few of them, including cybersecurity and some others, but what are and also basic things like spreadsheets, but what are some of across the three of you, when you think about the categories of skills that both employers and people training and supporting workers should be focusing on? Are there ones that are most important, meaningful in serving the needs of industry and unlocking economic opportunity for workers? Zoe, does anything come to mind to start with you?
It really is a very broad range. I mean, Andy is very focused on the construction jobs and the skills that are needed there. The potential for many, many jobs to be ones where people incrementally learn what they need to learn is tremendous if we can develop a system that will do that. If the ecosystem approach Lisa's talking about actually is robust enough and coordinated enough that a Google certificate can sit alongside a community college certificate, and alongside training that an employer does on the job, that's when we'll really have a system that works for people to keep growing. And this includes fields of engineering. It includes a whole range of the changes in work that are developing. There's really almost no field untouched. We're particularly focused on those fields that are essential to the country's competitiveness and the foundational fields like healthcare that are necessary for the country's well-being. But any field, if you're making games, you know, if you're doing Instagram posts, there's, you know, I mean, I'm not worried about those people, but there are enormous needs and jobs and potential to, you know, be successful as a designer, you know, for things that are fun to do, not necessarily essential to our competitiveness. So it really is across the board. I mean, it'd be interesting if people in the audience who have experience with the challenges of developing their workers, because there always are here at the Ideas Festival people who know firsthand these challenges and what you're doing. The place I think we really need to double down, where America really has a potential competitive edge, is on employers training their own workers, because we lost that system decades ago. My friend Judy will remember when she worked in industry that, you know, the companies trained their workers. They invested. Not just the white-collar workers. Everyone who worked at a company would get constant retraining, whether it's GE or IBM or, you know, you name it. And even the government now doesn't have resources to train their workers, you know. Someone comes on board as an administrative assistant and they get no training, you know. We just haven't invested in on-the-job training. So this is a place where some companies are really leading, and you know, I could talk afterwards with people if they want ideas of that, but there are some companies really leading, radically transforming the work that substantial numbers of their employees are doing and retraining them for it. But not enough people are focused on it. I can't tell you how many times I talk to someone in business, or someone's been in the audience in a panel like this, and they come up to me and they say, you know what? I just laid off 5,000 workers in order to hire 5,000 workers with completely new skills. It never dawned on me to retrain my workers. And you know, with severance payments and the costs of bringing on board, you know, new people and the loyalty to your company and all of that, it's not more costly to train your workers. So then the question becomes for companies, well, they're not going to be the trainers in all circumstances. They might in some. A lot of companies do a lot of, you know, training when you get hired, but then, you know, they don't retrain you as you grow. But there are programs now like Lisa's and you know, all kinds of programs online where you could enable your workers to take those courses, and there are relationships with community colleges, and states are investing, so there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, Lisa, maybe,
Right,
and
Lisa,
Andy.
go ahead.
The data actually shows exactly what Zoe's saying, that it's 7 times cheaper, actually, to reskill your own workers than to go hire a new person.
You have to send me that data.
So for sure that's important. And maybe just to build on your question to Kevin. So we always like data at Google, and we like to look at our trends data. And so your question was like, what are some of these skills that are really in demand? And so I really love this little tidbit. We look at queries of how to become, like how to become this, how to become that. And last year, the #1 how to become query on Google was how to become a data analyst. And so you can see people are eager to get the skills they need for these jobs. And at the same time, we know that employer demand for data analytics skills grew 15 times the average of demand for other types of skills. So there's a good coherence happening here. Employers really need these skills, and people are looking for how to be trained in things like data analytics. And the good news is people are amazing learners. We can all learn so many incredible things, and we're gonna need to. When we started working on this workforce training initiative at Google, my team handed me a statistic from the World Economic Forum that said that 50% of people would have to be reskilled within the next few years. And I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I will tell you that for over a year I refused to use that statistic because I said, oh, no one's ever going to believe that. I'm not going to say that. No one believes that half of us are going to have to be reskilled. But I bet at this moment in this room there's not a person who doesn't believe that half of us are going to need to be reskilled over the next few years, me included, right? And that is an incredible opportunity. And if government and industry, if we can, and we don't have anyone with us today in the education system, but I'm a big believer that the education system can and is already playing a really important role here. If we do all work together, we can fill some of these really important gaps that we have in our society, and most importantly, create real economic stability for people in our country.
And the data, and Andy, the data analyst example is interesting because some of the research suggests that a number of the professions that are identified as susceptible to automation by AI have a relatively straightforward path to be upskilled to data analysts. So that's a super relevant idea. Andy, did you want to?
Kevin, I was waiting till I was waiting for what the time was when AI
Okay.
came up. in the
It's now
conversation.
25 minutes in, we've addressed it.
I would love to talk about the education system, but back to this issue on industry and AI. Here's a good example. Industry is recognizing that they have a workforce problem. They've always invested in their higher skilled workers. We have good examples now of large companies, Walmart, Amazon, others who have kind of now started to say, oh, we need to be investing in our frontline workers as well. They're working with folks like Google to kind of figure out how to do that. Folks might have seen a couple weeks ago, Accenture, to build out its AI business, said it's going to spend $3 billion, and part of that is they're going to upskill 80,000 workers, right? Their employees, as well as employees of their clients, to kind of figure out how to harness AI as part of this. I'm not worried about the Accentures of the world. I'm worried about the 50-person company that does not even have an HR manager, let alone an in-house training program and things like that. And their jobs are going to be impacted by AI, digital skills, automation, things like that. And so I think that one of the things that I think we as a country need to do is we have always single firm examples that are great. They often tend to be big national, international firms, but that's not the majority of employment in this country. The majority of employment is with smaller and medium-sized companies, many of which do not have the capacity to figure out how to solve this problem on their own. And that's where I think public policy is going to be a huge part of it. Mm-hmm. And we can't solve it firm by firm. And that is what we do differently than most rest of every other, talking about competitiveness, every other country in the world that we compete with at the high end of the global economy. They organize by industry. They organize by sector. They come up with a set of demand understandings and skill requirements across the sector that firms agree on. They all say that they have their own proprietary thing, but like generally this is what this industry needs, and then we create a strategy to do that. We're trying to solve this company by company by company. And so we need to come up with a policy strategy that brings folks together by industry. And I think the Commerce Department and its Good Jobs Challenge and the partnerships that it's investing, we finally are starting to get this. We actually have industrial policy now in what we're trying to do with semiconductor production. So I think we are finally catching up to the rest of the world. We need to bring the labor part into that, because that's the only way we're going to both get to scale, but it's also the way that we're going to help these smaller companies who are not going to be able to do this on their own, but can be doing it with other companies within their region, within their industry.
Yeah, this is, if I may, just to follow up on what Andy's saying, this has been a real priority of Secretary Raimondo at the Commerce Department. She went to the Commerce Department as secretary from being governor of Rhode Island, and that happens to be where I worked with her before I took the current job I'm in. And her recognition from Rhode Island was that you needed every sector involved, educators and organizations that were serving workers for childcare, and all kinds of people involved in creating the capability of people to move into these jobs. And so the focus has been, as Andy says, in the Recovery Act, we had $500 million to invest in communities in creating good jobs, and those programs all had workforce components and required community sectoral collaboration. We're doing the same thing in the Chips and Science Act. We now have $52 billion in the Chips and Science Act to work with industry to rebuild the semiconductor industry in the US. All of those we're asking companies to consider sectoral partnerships. We're putting out guides on how you create them for places that don't understand that, and getting a lot of the organizations that do understand it into the conversation. And by the way, requiring childcare of the bigger contracts, so that that some of the learning that was mentioned about the support systems that are needed in order to diversify the workforce are also part of it.
There's probably also a tax. There are other things that are touched, including tax incentives for capital investment as opposed to human investment. Things like that. We're going to go to questions in just a minute, and hang on for 1 sec. I want to ask each of you the sort of fundamental question I think that it would be great to hear your kind of recap of is what works for closing the skill gap at scale? Because I think we all recognize for competitiveness reasons, we haven't talked a lot about AI, but that's clearly one of the dimensions. So if you had, Lisa, maybe we start with you, and then Andy and Zoe, but what actually works? Like what sort of training or programs are working at real scale that can make a meaningful impact on what we're talking about?
Yeah, so we have kind of a three-pronged approach. We have a direct to person approach where anyone can sign up for our classes and do them fully online. And like I said, the key thing is we're meeting people where they are. They need it to be when they have time, right? Online, on demand, easy for them to use. But the other way that we believe there's scale is one with employers, as you've said so beautifully. Employers are dying for people who have these skills. We teach 5 career fields in our Google Career Certificate program. There are millions of open jobs that are just looking for people who have the skills. So I think employer investment, as we've talked about. And then the third thing, which I'm really excited about, is education. Almost every state in our country actually has career readiness, like a legal obligation to provide some career readiness in the high schools. But we're still figuring out how to do that well. And we have some really exciting experiments happening in high schools in places like Anaheim, California, where often the parents have a 6th grade education. We had 800 high school students do the Google Career Certificate program this year as our first year. And schools in other places, Atlanta, Cincinnati. We have a small pilot we just announced in the New York City public schools. If only a third of Americans are going to have a 4-year college degree, then reaching them in high schools, I think, is a really exciting and interesting opportunity. And boy, these kids are smart and eager to learn. And so I think the education system is the next way to really reach people at scale.
Great. Andy, what works at scale?
There's another thing I was going to say, but on this education issue, like we should just redefine public education in this country. Like we basically guarantee you an education till the age of 18. Not everybody gets a good one. But the reality is that everybody needs to be seen as part of the education system moving forward. And we need to acknowledge the fact that many people are getting education because they want to get a better paying job, a good paying job, a better paying job, which means making it more available to think in those terms in primary and secondary school, and making it easier for working people to be getting publicly funded education to advance their careers over time. So that would be like the big thing that would work at scale. But otherwise, I would say like our recipe for how it is set up a good set of training programs that are actually going to work. 4 basic components. Obviously expand access to education and training, and there's a number of different things that we can do within the context of our public programs, higher ed, workforce training, what it is we're trying to get digital skills as part of the broadband expansion now, are just some examples. Fund industry partnerships or sectoral partnerships that's bringing education and training providers of all levels together with local industry, all firms, to kind of figure out like what is it that we need to do both now to fill current skill openings and what is it that we need to do 10 years from now, and start making those plans now. Recognize that training is not the entirety of the solution. Beyond the fact that we need better quality jobs in a lot of these sectors, we also need a lot of other things that will help people manage work and study and family. So support services like childcare and transportation, good career guidance, peer mentoring, things like that that's not about instruction, but is definitely going to make a big difference in who's going to succeed versus not. And then finally, if we're going to take equity seriously, then we both need to make sure that we're targeting investments for folks who've been left behind in the past, and we want to have to collect the data to make sure we actually can find out who it is that is getting hired. Are people of color getting hired in an industry where they haven't been hired in the past? Low-income workers, women, folks without a degree, people within the zip code of where it is that a new bridge is being built. That's the kind of data that we should be collecting, and we should be using that in conversations with policymakers to say whether or not we're actually fulfilling what we all think is a necessity if we're going to have a diverse and fully skilled workforce into the future.
Zoe, and then we'll go to questions.
Great. Well, I won't go back over a number of the things we've discussed that would really impact scale, but I will talk about something we haven't talked about yet, which is we need to try to figure out how we're going to have respect for a range of ways of getting trained for jobs. Because we've had a expectation that if you want to succeed in this country, you have to get a 4-year college degree. And that's been our singular focus. And that has caused people who have taken vocational ed programs, who've gone into union apprenticeship programs, which are often higher paid jobs than jobs people get coming out of college, to feel that those are second-class jobs. And I think we're seeing that playing out a lot politically, and I won't go there, but it's really critical that we figure out how to provide the respect that is deserved for the capabilities people have that we need in this country. And I tend to tilt toward the side of saying America has the talent, that this is not a question as much about whether people are capable of learning. It's a question of whether they can monetize what they know how to do. So I'm having a great time playing a virtual reality game with my friends at home as a, inner city 15-year-old, and I don't realize that if I work on a construction site, I can be using the virtual reality tools in my job and monetize what I already know how to do. So we need to address those issues of respect and talent, and I think that's a really important part of scaling.
That's a great point. Okay, we have a few minutes for questions. We have about 100 questions. Andrew's going to bring you the microphone. I just ask that you say your name first, and maybe we'll start on the left side. They had their hands up early, and then we'll work our way across. If you can keep your questions kind of brief, that'd be great, as we have a lot of them.
Yes, my name is Deo Munoz. I'm a Bezos scholar. I'm currently 17. And so I want to ask, I'm currently in high school, and I see a lot of students, there's like this new wave of students not deciding to go to college because they find it to not be necessary anymore, going in trade schools, going to these different areas. And I know you talked about how in Google they're using certificates out to students. And so I just want to ask, with this new age of AI, with these new resources going on, I find that educational resources and what the workforce is gonna do, I find that AI is gonna become a very, very big part. So how will you go about teaching these new high school students in the future about these new resources, this new AI, and how to utilize it possibly in the workforce to become more productive?
Great, thank you for your question. Lisa, do you want to take that one?
I can try, yeah. I am personally dying to educate myself on AI as well. I think that you're hitting on a really important point, which is that as these new technologies come, we all need to have easy to access, affordable ways to educate ourselves on them, because they're just going to keep coming. And it's, even if you have a college degree, it's impossible to imagine that whatever you learn in that 4 years will be sufficient for everything you're going to need to know how to do for the rest of your career. So we're looking at this problem actually right now. How do we teach people about AI, and how do we all quickly upskill ourselves as well?
My name is Priyanka, and I'm from Maryland. I'm also a Bezos scholar as well. And one of the main ideas for a Bezos program is to instill a community change project. And one of my ideas was to create more STEM resources and equitable resources. So I just wanted your advice on how do I instill more curiosity and just in younger people, elementary schoolers, middle schoolers, and high schoolers, especially since you have more experience with that. Thank you.
So we have these instructional designers at Google. That's like a job I didn't even know existed a few years ago, but they're all about how do you teach people. And the main thing I've learned from them, especially as it applies to teaching school-age kids, is it has to be fun, kind of like Zoe's video game story that she was just telling. So whatever it is you're trying to teach them, it has to feel relevant and fun for them. And if you can put the STEM instruction into something that's engaging for them, that's your best bet.
Great. Let me go in the middle here and then work our way over.
Hi, Erin Bradner from Autodesk. My company makes many of the tools that folks in construction certainly need training on. I'm curious about what the outlook looks like 15, 20 years from now, because we are talking quite a bit about training the existing workforce, so training the existing bodies, but what about when birth rate is decreasing and when immigration perhaps is decreasing? Where do we get the carbon life forms to actually fill these jobs. And is that something that's on your mind in government, or is it really about training the people that we have today?
It's clearly something that's on our mind. I think that we can't, the Chinese can project a radical change in their working age population. Some European countries have that decline. It's more complicated in the US, and so maybe it should be more of a driver, but it's not. But when you think about that mix of the work an individual does and the work that a machine does, I mean, I saw what you guys did when you created Avatar, and the dynamic between the human body and the machinery, effectively, that you created. And I think, we will see a lot more of that dynamic, and that where we don't have jobs that interest people, will be inclined to try to innovate, to find alternatives. And if we can build the ways that people can use their talent and deploy it most effectively, then we're going to always need that innovation. And it could be that we get to a place where we don't have enough workers because we don't have the numbers. But I just think in the meantime, we have so much opportunity and are so under deploying the talents of the workforce that we have now, the talents that people have and want to bring to things that interest them, and to feel engaged in the work of this country and the success of this country, and to feel their own place in the changes that are happening. I think that's enormously important. That I don't think it's wrong to say, we can't predict the demographics in a few years, and let's focus on where we are now.
Let's try and get in a few more questions. Maybe one more in the middle, and then come over this way. Sorry. You're going to have time after to come.
Hi, I'm Faith from the Burton Family Foundation. We're doing a lot of these reskilling and upskilling programs in Arizona. And we've seen a lot of success in the deeply technical and also to help representation when we provide a stipend. It doesn't need to be a lot. It is not doing a lifestyle increase while they're working through the program, but it helps them complete it. Do any of the programs that you're exploring include stipends?
Well, so the other word that didn't come up, apprenticeship. We didn't talk about apprenticeship today, right? So obviously a lot of the rest of the world, one learns while one is getting paid to do a job, right? So you've kind of figured out that's actually one of the ways, particularly for not just young people, but for adults, like that needs to be part of the solution. And I think we all think that apprenticeship could be a much bigger part of what it is that we do in this country, and we've made some attempts to make that easier and expand it with the resources from public policy. Industry is going to have to kind of figure out to recognize that they're going to have to make it easier for people to learn on the job, and they may be hiring people who are not qualified to do their job currently, but as an apprentice they can learn into that job, and I think that's going to require a reboot here. So I think we have other examples of, particularly for folks who have higher needs, folks who have been coming out of the reentry population, and others where even just getting a little bit of money while they're kind of finishing off their training is a huge impact, but I think we can scale that up to a lot of other folks that would benefit from it too.
Some of our partners also as well have experimented with small stipends to huge impact. So it's really been working. I'm happy to talk to you about it after.
Time for 2 more questions right here, and we'll just come up.
Hi, my name is Hazami Bermada, and I'm currently serving as the director for the Digital Equity Accelerator, which is a collaboration between Aspen Institute and HP. My question is, we specifically invest into NGOs that are accelerating digital equity, specifically closing the digital divide to ensure communities have access to healthcare, education, and economic opportunity. But one thing that I've noticed in working in this space for a decent amount of time is there's so many silos in kind of the digital equity landscape, where you have service providers that care about access to technology, then you have people that care about digital literacy, but very few people are investing into creating content that communities know how to navigate so relative and participatory content. My question for you all is how can we encourage more cross-sector collaboration on these topics, and how can we elevate the conversations of digital equity into spaces where it's not just seen as a transactional, I teach you something, goodbye, thank you.
I can
Yeah,
try that
yeah.
one. I love the content question because I think one of the problems has been everyone is trying to make their own content. And actually, there is pretty good content out there, not just from Google, but from other providers as well. So one of the approaches that we made is we made a scaled partnership program. We have 9,000 partners in the US that all just plug into our system and take whatever content they want. We also have a train the trainer model where if you have an organization and you reach high need communities, we can train your trainers in using that content effectively. And that's been kind of our approach is just anyone can apply to be in part of the Grow with Google Partner Program, and then you can access anything that you want.
Can I just a quick addition on this too, which I do feel that it's only recently that we have kind of recognized that digital equity it's certainly about broadband, it's about devices. I think it's only recently that we've kind of recognized that digital skills is kind of part of the digital equity thing that we need to solve. And I do think that there are folks who are trying to integrate that. For instance, folks at Comcast sitting over here, they've been trying to kind of figure out, they obviously are very interested in trying to expand broadband, but also then how can we create things like digital navigators to help people actually can make use of that? And they've been working on that in different states, and we've been supporting that as well. So I do think that there's opportunities where we can bring the skill and content part in along with devices and the broadband expansion itself.
We have time for one last question, maybe right in the middle here, and I'm sorry for everyone else. This conversation could go on for a lot longer, it appears.
Hi, my name is Sophia Mikalakis. I have a question about worker voice and who represents worker voice in this conversation. I'm aware that labor union participation has declined dramatically in the last several decades, and when there are upcoming opportunities in things like industrial policy development, and some of these industries, care industry and many others, construction, are not highly unionized. Where will worker voice come from? How are you thinking about that?
Let me respond on that first. My father was a labor union official, so I come to this issue honestly. Labor is actually very involved in representing workers in these programs. As you know, the president's very committed to the role of unions, and we have had labor deeply involved in looking at how we develop the construction side of the various programs that we're talking about, whether it be CHIPS and Science or broadband, also how to develop the workforce to work in the fabs. So labor's very much at the table. In addition, we've really been encouraging of these sectoral partnerships in communities so that as communities are making decisions about how they use the dollars that will build out these opportunities, that labor and others who are engaged with workers, other worker-serving organizations are deeply engaged. And that's been true of a variety of different programs, the Good Jobs program that we talked about earlier and others.
We're going to have to end there. I want to thank Lisa and Andy and Zoe and encourage you all to keep this important conversation going right now and through the next few days. Thank you for joining.